All right, everyone, let's get going. Thank you for joining us today for another episode of Accelo Best Practices. Today, we're going to be focusing on retainers. My name's Tom. I'm an account manager here at Accelo, and I'll be your host. I'm also joined by my colleague, Peter, who will be presenting today, and he works in implementations.
Awesome. Hello, everyone. My name is Peter. I'm going to be your presenter for today as we go through this wonderful journey together of retainers inside of Accelo. So what is this meeting going to pertain to? Mainly, we're going to be speaking about retainers, and the agenda is we're going to be first looking at what are retainers. I'll give you some examples. Then we'll start talking about pricing and scope of work, rollover and overages, reoccurring and ad hoc work, so how we link those tickets or reoccurring tasks to our retainer. And then we'll even dive into triggers a little bit at the end. So setting up those if-then statements. So if a certain set of rules are met on a retainer, we are taking the appropriate action, whether that be to notify someone if our retainer is going over budget, or when the retainer expires, we're letting our sales rep know that, hey, we should probably renegotiate a new contract. Now, at the end, please do have some questions ready for me. I'll try and answer all of them together with Tom. Go ahead and submit those through the webinar, and we'll answer them shortly after the presentation.
In fact, I might even jump in and chat to you guys if you've got any that I can answer via the chat. But if it does require a little bit more of a detailed explanation, we'll come back to it at the end. Cool.
Exactly. So the big question of the day, what are retainers? Retainers are ongoing work with the client with a price per hour, with its contract, and there's a set of deliverables. So let's talk about setting up a retainer together first. So I'm going to be kind of tabbing back and forth between this presentation and my test deployment within Accelo. So we're going to set up a test retainer on our own that we're going to do live, and I'm going to be walking through the steps as they pertain to the slide. So we're going to go ahead and drop down our create option inside our Accelo deployment, and we're going to go ahead and hit create retainer. This will take us to our retainer creation page. Now you'll notice there are 3 separate columns here on our retainer creation page. We're going to work through each one together. On the left-hand side, you have that retainer information. It's pretty general stuff. We need to define what company this retainer is against. I'm going to go ahead and put it against my company OnePlus. You have a title of that retainer, and that is just how should we name this. If you have a set of terminology that you use or a naming convention between you and your companies, you can go ahead and use that here. We might call this one monthly support, annual contract. All right, and then you've got the company contact. So who from this company are you working with? We'll go ahead and set that as Drew. You've got your manager here. So who from your company is going to be managing this retainer? Aside from all of these ridiculous names I have here, let's go ahead and select me, Peter. We'll go ahead and select the type of retainer. And now one thing to note, each different retainer type can have its own preset values. So the moment I select my type here, some values are going to populate in my right-hand column, period and allowances. So I'm going to select prepaid monthly work. That's going to populate some values for me. So that's the power of the retainer types inside of Accelo. You already have those prices set for you. All you need to do is select the correct type. Some ways I've seen this utilized really nicely with some of my clients, particularly the MSP clients or marketing agencies who have different packages for their SEO and analytics, they might have different tiers. So I'm talking about bronze tier, silver tier, gold tier, platinum tier. Each one of those different tiers entails a different level of work. Each different tier with their own price. So when they select that correct retainer type for the client, the price populates for us, the hours populate for us, and even the set of tasks populate for us specific to that retainer type. I'm going to go ahead and tab back over into our slide. And we've talked about some of the examples already. Right now, what we're setting up is a prepaid support contract. So the one I'm going to be setting up right now is just a monthly support contract, and it's going to last for exactly 1 year. So 12 different periods are going to be generated throughout this example. Jumping back to our slide, we're going to go through the pricing now. Now, I've already talked about these common details on the left-hand side. We're going to go ahead and finish up with our status. We'll make sure that we're defaulting to an active status right away. Now, that might not always be the case for you. I have come across some clients who like to default retainers into a status of pending payment. So they don't want to track work. They don't even want to think about this retainer until it's been paid. So some clients have implemented a status called pending payment to account for that. Most clients, though, they just default it right into active because they're going to send an invoice right away. We have our commencement date here. This is the day we want to define this retainer began. We're going to set this one on January 1st, 2018. And we're going to have this run for exactly 1 year. And it's going to end on January 1st, 2019. We have some tags down below that you can implement if you want to tag it with any specific information that you can then filter on at a later point in time. But now that's going to take us to our main column here, periods and allowances. Now, in the period allowances, this is where we'll be setting up the following information: our duration. Is it a fixed period? So are we going to be billing our client on a cadence of monthly, yearly, bi-weekly, weekly, annually? Or you can have it set to unlimited. Now, I'm sure you're wondering, when am I ever going to use an unlimited duration contract or retainer? Now, when you would use that is if a client has paid up front for a large bulk of hours. So this is mainly looking at you MSP IT type companies out there. A client just writes you a check for, let's say, $5,000. And with those $5,000, they are permitted to 50 hours of your time. Now, they can chip away at that block whenever they want. We can set those hours to not ever expire, but that is their block of hours, and they do not run out within a period. They are unlimited. So the only time you're really going to be concerned about those hours is when they are almost used up. So that's an example where you would use an unlimited period duration. In the example we're giving today, we're going to stick with fixed, and we're going to keep it monthly. Next, you've got the period billing. So are we going to be charging our client before the period begins, or are we going to be charging them at the end of the period? And that's going to be captured within prepaid or postpaid. Prepaid, we're going to charge our client before the period begins, and postpaid, we're charging our client at the end of the month. That way, we're only charging them for the work that was completed. Now, with prepaid, we're charging them this flat fee no matter what. And that's because you've probably agreed upon a fee with the client that you'll always be billing all work under this contract at a specific rate, or you're just giving them a set amount of hours every month based on what they're paying. Coming down below, you have the period allowance, and you have the options of unlimited hours, or even fixed value. Now, unlimited hours might come into play when a client is paying you a large amount. Let's just say $6,000 in this scenario. Every month that client is paying you $6,000. With that $6,000 monthly reoccurring revenue, they may just become your largest client. So you really don't care how often they reach out to you because they're paying you the most. We'll go ahead and set that to unlimited hours, but we still will keep track of how many hours of work we're doing, because maybe we need to change that a year from now when we have other clients who are paying us just as much, but using a lot less hours. Now, next, you've got the fixed hours. Again, this is used when a client is purchasing a fixed amount of hours per month. So no matter what type of work comes in, the main thing we're keeping track of is the amount of time we spend working with this client. So for each hour we log, it's going to chip away at this block of 10 hours. Now, whenever a new period is generated, those 10 hours are going to refresh. The last option you have available to you here is your fixed value. Now, I'm sure you're wondering how we can utilize fixed value, and it's actually really clever. So we're going to go ahead and say our fixed value is $2,000. Our client pays us $2,000. Therefore, instead of a bucket of hours, they now have a bucket of money. So whenever work comes in, the value of that work will slowly chip away at this bucket of money. Now, a scenario where you would use fixed value over fixed hours is when a rate hasn't necessarily been pre-negotiated, so you're charging them exactly on the work that you're doing. So let's say that we have this client OnePlus. Now, their monthly support contract entails them to $2,000 worth of value. In the middle of the month, Drew from OnePlus reaches out and says, hey, I need some remote support. Your rate for remote support is $100 an hour. You create that ticket, you link it to the retainer, and all the work for that ticket is captured at $100 an hour. At the end of the day, you've logged 2 hours, which is $200 taken away from the value of their retainer, $2,000. Now, using that same example, we're going to say that this time, Drew has contacted us about on-site support. He needs someone to come out there to look at his modem. His internet stopped working. So we're gonna go on site and we're gonna charge him more for that because that's gonna be $200 an hour of our time. We spend 3 hours on site, so that's $600 taken away from the $2,000 that he's allotted every month. So hours are gonna be useful if we're negotiating a fixed hourly cost, and value is going to be useful if we're going to be charging them based on the work that they're soliciting from us. Awesome. Down below that, continuing on fixed value, you have expenses consume prepaid value and materials consume prepaid value. Now, when you have either of these options selected, that means that any expenses incurred for the month will take away from the value of that month, and any material cost will take away from the value of that month, as opposed to adding on top of the $2,000. All right, so we're gonna make this one fixed hours now that we've talked fully about fixed value, and we'll go ahead and move from here. Now, one thing that I hadn't covered just yet are materials, and I'm gonna get to those in just a second, right before or right after I talk about rollover. So down below, we've defined that our periods are going to be monthly. We're going to charge our client $2,000 and they're going to get 10 hours of our time. Now, the next option we have is renew periods 0 days before latest period expires. If I were to set this to, let's say, 3, that means using January as an example, January 28th, a new period will be created in Accelo for February 1st to March 1st. And the action that will happen is we will create an invoice. Now you have some flexibility here in terms of what happens. You can have an invoice create, you can have an invoice not create. We can create that invoice and send it directly to the client. You can create that invoice and fax it to them if any of you still have clients who use a fax machine. And then we have create invoice and notify account user. What that bottom option does is it creates an invoice inside of Accelo and it notifies the manager of the retainer that an invoice has been created. Now, that one I find pretty useful because some clients want to see the invoice before it gets sent out because they just want to double check it, make sure everything's accurate. So they find that option working pretty well for them. If you want to fully automate the invoicing of your clients, you would go ahead and select create invoice and send email. Now, down below, you have rollover. When you have rollover selected, that just means that if Drew has only used 8 of the 10 hours we've allotted him for the month, those additional 2 hours are going to roll over into the new month of February. All right, so coming up above, you have your rates and invoicing. This is where you can set a defined rate for the retainer. Now, this is useful if you have any tickets come in and you want that ticket to always default at that rate. And retainer rate is especially useful when you have your period allowance as fixed value as opposed to fixed hours. That way you can say that, okay, no matter what, we're always going to charge at this specific rate. You can drop down and select a set of rates that you have already predefined in your deployment, or you can set a custom rate by just selecting the option here on the right-hand side. Below that, you have excess retainer rate. This is where you'll define the rate at which you'll be charging your client the moment he goes over 10 hours. So when Drew is coming up on his 11th hour, we're going to charge him 50% more. We're going to charge him $150. Now below you have an option for applying retainer rate for issues and projects linked to this period. So within your retainer contract, if any tickets come in for this client or any projects come in for this client and you link them, they will inherit the rates you've defined here, which is your retainer rate and your excess retainer rate. We'll go ahead and select that. You have your billable contact here. This is who will be receiving the invoice every month for this retainer or support contract. We'll go ahead and say that's going to be Drew again. And then we have our invoice template. We'll make sure we select retainer work because that's one that I have set up in my test deployment to always bill for the correct and open periods. Next, you have service item. Now, I'm sure a lot of you use different service items, and this is to make sure that the revenue generated on this account gets allotted to the correct account ledger within your chart of accounts. The way we pull your service items in are from your accounting platform. So whether they be Xero or QuickBooks Online, that's where we get that information from. So I went ahead and selected account 1000, general tax-free. Lastly, I've got my description on invoice line item here. This is just how this line item will appear on the invoice when I send it to my client. So finally, we'll get to materials. So our material costs can be added on top of our monthly prepaid costs. So common material costs that I see, those are going to be subscription costs monthly. So you have to use a specific set of software for the client and you want to charge them for that. It could be server hosting, could be website hosting, server maintenance, anything like that. We can add that in as a material. So we'll select add material template, select from our list of materials. And again, these materials are being brought over from your accounting platform. So whatever materials you have stored inside of Xero or QuickBooks Online, those are going to sync over seamlessly into Accelo, and you'll be able to apply those materials to your projects, to your tickets, or to your retainers. So we'll go ahead and select one of our materials down here. As you can see, I have a few. We'll go ahead and call this one coffee mugs. The purchase price is $75 and the sale price is $100, and we'll say that the client is getting 5. We'll go ahead and remove our AdWords budget, and now we have our material cost here, which is adding an additional $500 every month, so our client will be billed $2,500. So we've talked about materials, we've talked about rollover and overages. Now I would like to talk about reoccurring work. So in this example, we are setting up a monthly support contract. Within that monthly support, there may be a few things we need to do every month. Some items that I've seen for digital agencies or marketing firms might be search engine optimization contact, paid per click campaign, and PPC analysis. So drawing up those reports and sending them to the client at the end of the month so they know exactly what's going on with their retainer. Now, for you MSPs and IT companies out there, what I've seen are tasks monthly for system health checks. And this could just be to make sure that the server is healthy, everything on the website is working correctly, no widgets are broken, and we'll want to draw up a report and just let our client know that, hey, things are running at 100% capacity. So we'll go ahead and draw up this title of the task. We'll call it Systems Health Check. We have our manager here. So who from our company is going to be managing this task? We'll default that to the retainer manager. And then we have our assignee. So who from our company will be handling this task every month? If you've defined a specific user to do this task every month, you can go ahead and set that here on this task creation. We'll go ahead and select Hugh here, and he's going to be in charge for this task every month. Now, you've got your start and you've got your due date. This defines when the task should begin and when it should be due. For this one, we're going to go ahead and say that this task should begin on the expiry date minus 7 days. So a week before our month of January expires, this task will begin. And it will be due on the period expiry date. So January 24th, this task will begin. and it will be due on January 31st. You can set a defined rate if you want to charge this task at a specific rate. For now though, we're going to go ahead and use our retainer rate. You have required skills here if you want to set a list of skills to further organize and granularize this task. So only people with this set of skills can accomplish this task. You can tag it with anything you see fit, which you can then further filter on at a later point in time. And then you'll just include the description of the task. So run a systems health check and report to client. We'll leave the status as pending, and then we have the estimated time. We'll say that's going to take 1 hour. We'll save that, and we've just created our first templated task. Now, looking at both tasks and materials, these are on the retainer level. Think of this as the top floor. Any items we add here in terms of tasks or materials will be recreated on all following periods. Now, you have an option, one more here at the top. When periods are closed, do you want to auto-complete this task or not auto-complete it? So if you don't do it at the end of the month and it's not a big deal, we can go ahead and opt to auto-complete it because it's just going to regenerate on the next month. So we've just successfully set up our first retainer. We've gone through all of our columns, we've set our reoccurring tasks and materials, and now we're going to go ahead and hit save and move on and actually create this retainer inside of Accelo. So before we start talking about triggers, I want to talk about a few more things on this page. Now, for those of you who are still really new to Accelo and kind of fully understanding the power of the retainers, I want to just give you a brief overview of what we're looking at on the screen right now. This is the retainer page of Accelo. It's for a monthly support annual contract. On the left-hand side, you have tons of information that helps you identify bits of information relevant to you for this retainer, such as the company, the contact, our manager, our billable contact, our renewal terms, and our team feature. Now, if I could draw some examples here for both digital agencies and MSP companies, how can we utilize this team feature? Now, for digital agencies, you may want to add people in as a team, and you'll include anyone who is helping out this retainer. So if this specific retainer has a dedicated SEO person, or a dedicated web analytics person, or a dedicated tech lead, you can go ahead and define their role via the team option. Now, the beautiful thing about the team option is it doesn't have to be specific to someone inside your Accelo user base. It can be an outside contractor or an outside contact, and they could be contributing to this retainer in some way, shape, or form. In this example, though, I'm going to go ahead and add in someone on my team or within my company. I'm going to add in Shuli. Oh, let me try that again. I said I'm going to add in Shuli. There we go. And I'm going to define her role. So that's categorized under her type. And this is fully customizable. Right now, I just have advisor or vendor partner. So I'm going to say Shuli is going to be an advisor, and she's going to be the one I want to talk to whenever there are technical issues. Talk to Shuli. And then I have an option to auto CC on all activities. If I have this selected, that just means on all outgoing emails I send from this retainer, Shuli will automatically be included. So she's kept in the loop on everything that's happening within this retainer. I'm going to deselect that for now, and I'm going to save. And we've just successfully added in Shuli as a team member. So when I hover over her tooltip, I can see her name and her immediate role in how she's contributing to this retainer. I have my key dates down below, comments, and a few more options. Now, looking at my overview tab, you see that we have prepaid recurring retainer. On the left-hand side, this side over here, this is information specific to the retainer as a whole. We're charging them $2,500 every month, which includes 5 materials. Our duration is going to be 1 month. The type of retainer is prepaid. And yes, we do have rollover enabled. If we had any linked work, so if we had a ticket or a project linked to this retainer, then the budget, so if we had an hourly budget specced out on either that project or ticket, would populate here. So we can see at a glance that, okay, based on the projects and tickets linked to this retainer, there are 10 hours of work remaining to get completed. On the right-hand side, you have information relevant to the period as a whole. So our current period, we have 10 hours of allowance remaining. It's going to renew in 2 days, and we've used 0% of our allowance so far. We've used 0 hours, and we still have 10 hours remaining. Down below, under our remaining work, we see that we have 1 hour, and that is being pulled from the one task we have assigned to the period. And that's down here under Systems Health Check. Drop down below one more, and you see the list of all of your periods. Right now, we're currently looking at January 1st to January 31st. Now, before we get into triggers, and I know I'm sure a lot of you are very eager to get into those, I do want to talk about how we actually link work to your retainer and how we can really leverage that to your advantage. So coming over to our tabs, projects and issues, this is where we'll see any items that are linked to this retainer. We're going to create a ticket together really quickly, and we're going to link it to this exact retainer. So I'm going to create a new issue here in my new tab. We're going to make sure that this issue is related against the same company, and that's going to be 1+. We're going to call this linking example. Link this to a retainer. All right, we'll make sure we have our assignee selected, our main contact, the type of ticket. So a couple of things that I've seen in terms of ticket types and how they relate to retainers is clients may have 2 different ticket types. One for on-contract tickets, and they may have a progression action in there to automatically link the ticket to a retainer. And 2 for off-contract tickets. So tickets that don't relate to a retainer at all and will be billed for individually. In this example, we're going to go ahead and select default. And the item that we're mainly looking at here is the retainer option. So if you're creating a ticket ad hoc for the client and you're unsure if it's going to be against a retainer, or even if they have a retainer on file, you would just drop down this option here and search for any retainer. That might prompt you to go, oh, okay, it's going to go into their monthly support contract. Let me go ahead and select that. We'll create this issue, and that's going to create our issue inside of Accelo. Perfect. So we're going to refresh our retainer page here, and we're going to take a look at that tab one more time. Except this time around, you'll notice there's going to be an issue there. And that's the ticket we just linked. So now these two are talking to each other. The work you log on this ticket will now get placed against the retainer period. So tickets can span multiple periods. So if you logged 5 hours today and tomorrow, and then in February you logged another 5 hours, it will be split up based on when you logged it. So we're going to log some time here on this ticket simply by just selecting log time, and we're going to say 3 hours. We're going to say subject, and we're going to say description of work log. We'll save that. And those 3 hours will be captured on the ticket, but the time will ultimately feed into the contract that it's linked to. Refreshing our page once more, we're going to come down below, and we see that for our period, we've now utilized 3 of our 10 hours. And that value is being pulled from the ticket where we just logged 3 hours. You'll notice the values up here are populating or repopulating as well. And then under issues, you can see the amount of billable hours you've raised on it. Awesome. So what we're going to do next is we're going to drop down one level, and we're going to look at the period of January 1st to January 31st. And the way we're going to do that is we're just going to select the January period here. So as I said earlier, The retainer level is the top level. What we've basically done is we've just gone down a flight of stairs, and we are now looking at the floor that is specific to the month of January. Here is where we can see our usage for the month. So where's our time log coming from? We see that right now, of the 3 hours we've logged, it's all coming from this issue, one linked issue, 108 linking example. If we were to log additional time, it would repopulate accordingly. We'll call this test log directly on the period level, and we're going to log 2 hours. We'll save that. That time log will populate for us and take away from the utilization. We're going to refresh this page once more just so we have those values updating. And boom, we've now used 50% of our allowance, and you see the 3 hours we've logged on the ticket and the 2 hours we logged directly on the period. Now, if you made a mistake and you see that this issue should not be linked to this retainer, then what you can do is you can unlink this issue from the retainer period. Now, when you link, when you unlink the issue from the retainer period, you are removing the billable time from the allowance used. So the moment we unlink, these 3 hours are going to be added back to the pool of 10 hours, and our utilization or hours used will only be 2 hours based on the other log that we have here. So unlinking tickets is extremely useful if you've accidentally linked a ticket to the wrong retainer, or you just don't want that work showing up on the retainer for the month. Now, on this retainer page or period page, we have the stream. Again, all relevant correspondence captured here. Attachments, you'll find all attachments that relate to the month of January. Any tasks will be populating here. Now, in the beginning, when we created this retainer, we did set a set of templated tasks. Now, those tasks are always going to recreate on each following period. But let's say you have a one-off. You have a task that is only relevant for January. The way you would create that task and ensure that it doesn't get carried over into February is by clicking into the retainer period as we are now and just select Add Task. That'll create a task on the month of January, which will not push over to the month of February. That same concept is applied to materials as well. So if you add in a material on the month of January, that material cost will not carry over to the month of February because you're making it specific to the month of January. You have your expenses here. If you incur any expenses for the month, you can add in those expenses. And then you have your invoices where you can see all invoices as they relate to this period. All right, so jumping back to our retainer page, now we can talk about triggers. So triggers within retainers. So in short, triggers are an if-then statement. If this set of rules happens, then do this action or perform this action. To give you an idea of what I've seen, here's an example. If 80% of the budget is consumed for the month or period of January, then notify the account manager, so the person managing the retainer, and notify the customer as well, so they know that they're coming up on 80% of the usage for the month. And let them know too that if they go over, you're going to charge them more. Another one is client is using time too fast. So if you notice there's a high burn rate, you can set those rules up as a trigger and notify the AM and the customer as well if you like. So you're letting your account manager know that there's a high burn rate, there's a lot of work coming in. Is this normal? Reach out to the client. And we can also let our customer know as well that, hey, you are using a lot of time very quickly. At this rate, you're going to deplete your monthly allowance within the first week. Next up, you've got out of contract, move to status expired. So this is one that I really like. And it's when the contract is expired, we automatically move it into retainer expired. Now that doesn't happen by default. So if this retainer expires next year and we don't have this trigger set, then it's not automatically going to be moved. We'll need to set up that trigger. And that way Accelo will know that when the expiry date is reached for the retainer, we automatically move it into retainer expired. Now, in the same vein of that, I want to mention another trigger that I find really useful, especially with people who need to renegotiate their contracts with their client before they continue billing them. So what I've seen is a trigger that fires 60 days away, or when there are less than 60 days remaining for the retainer expiry date, then notify the account manager and let them know that this retainer will expire in 60 days. Please reach out to the client and renegotiate a new deal. That way they can just start a new retainer right away when it expires. So they're not losing out on any revenue. They're not wasting any time at the end trying to renegotiate in a month and then ending up losing a month. Those triggers kind of proactively let you know that, hey, this retainer is coming up. It might expire soon. Reach out to the client, see if you can negotiate a new contract and get them to sign on for another year. Now, going through our other examples, we're going to look at our templates now. So the templates come into play with the types. So if we edit this retainer once more, I'm going to highlight the types again. Now remember, the types ultimately decide what gets populated when you select it. So when we were creating our retainer, we had these values populate for us. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to head into our configuration. Now your configuration can be found on your left-hand side by coming all the way down and selecting config here. This takes us to the back end of Accelo. We're going to drop down to the bottom and we're going to find retainers in the middle. We're going to open progressions and fields, and this is going to populate a list of all of our different retainer types, or templates, if you will. So if we look at prepaid monthly work, SEO, PPC, and we edit that type, this is where we're editing the template. So the moment you select this type when you're creating a retainer, these are the values that populate. So again, this comes back to my example that I was talking about earlier. The different pricing structures. So the silver tier, the bronze tier, the gold tier. Each one might have a different type or template in your backend, each with their own monthly price, their monthly hours or value, the materials that get added on, and the tasks that need to be completed every month. Some example of different types I've seen are support contracts, $300 a month, unlimited hours, ad hoc tickets, no rollover, or $1,000 until purchasing another block. So those are our block amount of hours with unlimited period durations. You've got media management, $1,000 a month, 10 hours of work, and it does roll over. And then monthly bookkeeping and outsourced advisor. So those are just some examples that you can preset within Accelo. Now, the beauty of setting up these templates is that we can then filter on them at a later point in time. So we might have those different subscription tiers or whatever convention we're using to categorize our different types. We can come to our retainer list within Accelo. Again, that's on our left-hand side and selecting the retainers link. And from here, you can organize all of your retainers by the type: prepaid monthly work, standard retainer type, short-term video production, postpaid monthly support. These are just some examples I have in there right now. If I select prepaid monthly work, then what I am doing is I am looking at a list of all of my prepaid monthly work contracts. Now let's take this a step further. Let's say that we only want to see active monthly work contracts. Now we're looking at all active prepaid monthly works. And again, one more step further. Let's say that we only want to see active prepaid monthly contracts that we are the manager of. That brings us down to 2. Now, seeing this information at a moment's notice is really helpful for us because maybe we want to know immediately at any point in our day which contracts we need to check in on. So what we're going to do is we're going to save this as a filter and we're going to name it appropriately. We'll call this active prepaid contracts, Peter. Then you have the option to share it or to not share it. When you share it, you're basically just allowing other people to use this filter you created. If you do not share it, other users will not have visibility or will not be able to use the filter you created. Go ahead and save that filter, and it's now going to populate here. in our bottom left-hand corner. So the next time we come to retainers and we want to see that information right away, all we need to do is select that filter. Boom. Populates those preset filters that we saved in our filter right there for us. You can also find your filters under your saved icon, and you can see filters here. Under my retainer, I've got active prepaid contracts, Peter. And you see I have some other ones set up for my projects, my clients, my campaigns, my issues, kind of just to help better segment my work and what I need to see and what's relevant to me. All right, so I think that's all I really want to talk about today. I've touched on a lot of subjects, even more so than I thought I was initially going to touch on. So if you have any questions, now is the perfect time to bring those up. I think Tom is going to help me field those. So feel free to fire away.
All right. Thanks, Peter. There's been a few trickle in over the last 40 minutes or so. I've answered a few with the chat, but they're probably not a bad idea to go back over them. But I do have a couple of open questions actually that I might get your help with. Peter, if you wouldn't mind just opening up the edit retainer screen, I've got one question. Can we add a recurring task for every second month? And initially I was thinking no, but let's quickly take a look.
So you want a task that is only generated every second month. Now,
every second period, yeah.
Yeah, so that cannot be done if our contract is monthly. So unfortunately right now, our limitation in creating a task is what we have here, our start and our due dates. While it is something that I would love to see in Accelo one day, and anyone listening right now, I highly recommend you go post an ideas forum right now that you want to see reoccurring tasks like bi-monthly or repeats every week within a period, things like that. Would love to see those, but right now, to answer your question, you cannot do that if you have a monthly support contract.
Alternatively, if by chance you were to set up the period to be quarterly, then of course you could set up, a task that starts in the first month and one that starts in the third month. But as you mentioned, if the period's a month long, can't do it.
Yes, exactly. And do note that if you do switch to a quarterly cadence, that is the cadence at which your invoices will be created as well.
Awesome. Next one. Why would you create multiple periods? How would this affect automated invoicing? First reason that I can think of would be you'd want to, if you've got, for example, lots of tasks on your period, you can manually create them in advance so that the tasks also get generated and you can use that for future scheduling. I know I've seen that happen. Can you think of any other reasons, Peter, why you might create those periods in advance?
I think you pretty much hit the head on the nail there.
Yeah.
Nothing really particular to add there. It's kind of not something I see often. Usually I see people let Accelo create the periods for them. But if you're referring to creating the period X days before, then some people just like to have that invoice generated and have the period ready to go just a few days before.
Gotcha.
So it really comes down to personal preference and how you work within your company.
And the way that it would affect automated invoicing, basically because the periods have already been created, the invoices wouldn't be sent out. Just because the invoice creation and automatic sending process is part of the period creation automation. There would be potentially some ways around it if you wanted to automate the invoicing process, but also create the periods in advance. You could potentially use progressions to kind of make up for that. But it's very, very uncommon that people would want to create periods in advance and have the invoices go out automatically. Awesome. What's the significance of closing periods on retainers?
So when you close a period on a retainer, you're saying that you don't want any more time logged on that period. Now, at the end of the month, when that period expires, or whenever that period expires, if it's quarterly, it will close by itself. So once it exceeds, jumping back to our retainer that we set up together here today, let's scroll on down to period of January 1st, January 31st. On January 31st, this period status will be closed because we no longer need to log time in that month of January because we're now entering the month of February. So if you need to close one early, it's not something I see often, but you can do that just by selecting the overflow menu here and selecting close. Now, you bring up a good point in what is the significance of closing the period. I can see a really good reason to use this method if you are working with an unlimited block of hours. So let's say that a client has purchased 50 hours up front. They've paid you and their period will run indefinitely until they've consumed the 50 hours. Now, when they've consumed that 50 hours and they want to sign on again for another 50 hours, this is a prime opportunity to come in, close that period with their existing 50 hours that are utilized, and then adding in a new period with those new 50 hours, which you will then generate a new invoice for. And that all happens within this one retainer. So you don't have to create a new retainer for the new block of hours they've purchased. So I know I went off on a tangent there, but hopefully that all made sense.
Awesome. Let's have a look. You showed linking an issue. Would you mind just quickly showing linking a project as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So same concept is applied there. When we create our project on the project creation page, you'll have the option for retainer. So if we go ahead and select 1+, down below, you've got your retainer option. Now, if you would like to link an existing project, what we can do is we'll come to our projects and we find one for 1+. Go ahead, go to Sprint for 1+. And what we're going to do is we're going to drop down edit. We're going to select edit project. And we're going to find that retainer option once again and just select monthly support annual contract and save. That's going to link the project. It's nearly identical to the steps you would take when you link an issue or a ticket.
Awesome. Got a couple of questions around invoicing. We'll get to both of them. To start with this one, we have contracts built in a different system and collected that way, but we do want to track the retainer in Accelo as a prepaid allowance. Is there a way that we can track that without invoicing, and also have it not appear on in-client billing? So, I mean, the first piece of it is very easy. Yes, of course, you can set up a prepaid retainer and you can just select the option to have no invoices created. Is there a way to not have it show up on the client billing list? I'm presuming in this case, you're also logging time under the retainer. So my initial thought is to log non-billable time. Not sure if you got any suggestions there, Peter.
Yeah, I do actually have a suggestion there. So if I'm understanding this correctly, you have a retainer that you're keeping track of in Accelo, but you're billing for in a separate platform. Did I get that right, Tom?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. And you don't want the time you're logging in Accelo to show up in your client billing, which is located here, when you do your month-end invoicing, right?
Right.
Awesome. So what I would recommend in that scenario is you have a specific retainer type that is named whatever makes sense to you. So retainer, non-billable, or off contract, or different software, however you want to name it. Just make sure you have a different type here. That way you have all the retainers who follow that format categorized under one type. Now, you don't want that time showing up in your company billing module, which is fine, because now that we have it all captured in a separate type, when we do our bulk billing at the end of the month, when we drop down to retainers and we have our different types, we're just going to make sure that that type, where we have that special case of not having it billed in Accelo, but instead in a separate software, we're just going to exclude that type. So you would just exclude it. Let's say hypothetically that it was standard retainer type. We just wouldn't include it, and we would apply our filters. So we can still do our bulk invoicing at the end of the month while excluding retainers that fall under that specific type, like that.
Cool. Another I think that's probably the best option. Another option potentially also would be to create the retainer. And then if you want to log the work, link, let's say, a project to it and just make it a non-billable project. So all the time we'll push under the retainer, it'll go against the budget, but you'll never have to worry about it showing up in billing because all the hours will be logged as non-billable. Might not necessarily work for you, but it certainly is an option.
Yep, that's another option as well.
Cool. What would be best practice if I wanted to create a prepaid retainer of, let's say, 10 hours, but then once the 10 hours is up, I want to invoice again? I'm imagining, probably depends a little bit.
So this is a monthly retainer for 10 hours, and then you want to invoice automatically for the next month, or you want to invoice when the 10 hours run out and they run indefinitely?
I would imagine they run out, and then, there's the agreement in place, but once you reach the agreement, let's say the client wants to purchase more hours within the month.
Mm-hmm.
What would be probably best practice there?
Oh, I understand. So in the month of January, there are a lot of 10 hours. They use 10 hours and they say, hey, I just want to purchase more hours for the month of January. Is that right?
That's the way I understood the question, yes.
Okay, perfect. What we would probably do in that case is we can do this in a few ways. And the first way that comes to my mind is just creating a separate issue for it and linking that to the retainer. Now, the other way is coming into the period itself. So January 1st to January 31st, we would go ahead and just edit. And we can bump up the total amount of allotted hours here. We'll just say we double that. We'll save. And then we would just raise an additional invoice on the period level by coming to the period page where we are now and select create invoice. Then we'll just charge them an additional fee for those 10 hours. So you'll have 2 invoices against this one period. Perhaps, Tom, you have another way to approach this question as well?
No, I don't think so. I think also, nothing's ever stopping you from manually creating an invoice and sending it.
Exactly.
Particularly if you've already got a invoice template set up that matches, the 10-hour period. By just manually creating a new invoice and dropping in that template, you're going to be most of the way there to quickly just tacking on 10 more paid hours.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Would you use rollover if a client has an annual amount of 14 hours, however, they wish to be billed every 6 months? So I'm imagining there's an annual agreement in place.
Mm-hmm.
However, the client wants to be billed every 6 months. It probably depends on whether they're being billed at a fixed fee or whether they're being billed on how many hours they're using up to a point.
Mm-hmm.
If it's a fixed fee, very easy. Just make the length of the retainer a year, but make the period 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, so that's okay. So it's fixed fee. So you'd want to make the commence and expiry dates a year apart, and then you just make the period duration 6 months.
Yep. So adding on to that,
that's presuming that you're billing them in 2 equal parts.
Yep. Adding on to that, you would roll over in that case, because let's say for the first half of the month, or excuse me, for the first half of the year, they get 10 hours. And if they only use 7, you want those 3 to carry over into the latter half of the year. You would just go ahead and use rollover for that. So for that second half of the year, they would have 13 hours.
Gotcha. Got a couple questions relating to the portal and what this looks like in the portal and what visibility clients can have for this in the portal. I don't know if we'll have time to show you what it looks like in the portal. However, we can maybe show people how to impersonate a user so that they can go and do this themselves. But basically, you have, with everything in Accelo Client Portal, you have the option of picking how much visibility the client has. It can be everything from the full budget and the usage. And if you're talking about projects, the schedule as well as email activities and time entries, pretty much full visibility, all the way down to literally nothing. So it really just depends on how much information you want to show.
Yep. Adding on to that, Tom, I'll go ahead and show you very quickly how to impersonate a user on the client portal. So you need to navigate to the company page. When you're on the company page, you'll go ahead and drop down portal and you'll view and invite company users. From here, you'll go ahead and select that user and then drop down the cog wheel here and select view portal as. That is going to generate a portal impersonation link for you. And you'll now view the portal as this user sees it. Now, in terms of permissions, those are found in your configurations. So under Client Portal, you'll just select Client Portal, you'll select Retainer Permissions, and then you can specify, like Tom said, what you want that client to see. So if you want them to see financials, you can select what kind of financials you want them to see.
Right.
If you don't want them to see financials, you just select Show Progress. Same goes with attachments, tasks, and activities, as well as any fields as well.
Awesome. Got one question here, which was asked a little while back, which we'll circle back to. Basically asking, I have a bunch of retainers in Accelo, but I don't invoice out of Accelo at the moment. But if I'm going to move to Accelo, what do I need to watch out for to avoid older work being selected for invoicing? It's a good question. It's probably a little bit of reconciling what you've already invoiced, pulling that into Accelo. It probably depends a little bit. I don't know if you've got any advice on that, Peter.
I'm not sure if I understand the situation at hand.
Basically, there's live work that's been invoiced on live retainers, but in Xero. At least this is the way that I understand it. But we also want to set up these retainers in Accelo, and then moving forward, also invoice them out of Accelo. But just in the transition period, making sure that we're not doubling up on what we're invoicing the client.
Yep, absolutely. So I've actually got a note on that.
Okay.
So when you create a retainer, let's say that in this example, you want to switch over, start capturing your retainer usage inside of Accelo, and you don't want to bill for the current active period. For example, in this case, January, you would just not create an invoice for that first month. Now, when you create a retainer, regardless if it's prepaid or postpaid, the first invoice must be created manually. So the first period invoice must be created manually. Now, because of that, that works to your advantage. So you don't need to worry about creating that first invoice. All following periods will be created automatically. So for that next period, you'll just turn off automated billing inside your accounting software and let Accelo take over and generate those invoices.
It's a really good point. Awesome. There's probably a few more things to chat about, but we are running out of time. So maybe, Peter, let's wrap this up. And if anyone's got if there's anything that was unclear or any follow-up questions, on the next slide, we've got our support inbox for webinars. So feel free to follow up with any questions. And if you need any direct help with anything on retainers, I'm more than happy to help myself. So yeah, I mean, thank you everyone for joining. Awesome questions, great group. We do these webinars, we've been doing them for a little while now. So we do have a little bit of a library built up. You can find that at that hyperlink there on our best practice video library. Couple of weeks time, we're going to be doing another one of these focusing on the mobile app. So if that does interest you, keep your eye on the blog to sign up for that. And as I mentioned, bestpractices@accelo.com. Any follow-up questions you guys might have or any challenges, plus any suggestions. I mean, we try to cover a broad range of topics here. So if there's anything in particular you want us to talk about, we only plan these a couple of weeks in advance. So we're pretty flexible and definitely all ears. So yeah, I think that's about it. Thanks, Peter. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining along. And hope you guys walked away learning a thing or two. Also, really quickly, just because I'm typing out the response, Bruce Murray, if a client goes over 20 hours, so 25 hours, and it's on rollover, it will not create a negative balance. That's it. We'll close on that note. Thank you all so much.
Awesome. Cheers.